Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of High in Fibre. I'm your host. My name is Kelsey. I am the co-owner and one of the dyers at KZip Knits. And today we are going to be talking about all things Fair Isle and a little bit about just general color work. But today is the first of several parts where we're going to talk about different regions and the color work that kind of defines them. And today's topic is Fair Isle. Now, full disclosure, I have already filmed a good portion of this once, and then my camera card got full, and then another camera card got full. My phone went off a number of times. There may have been some expletives, but now, finally, we're hoping, fourth time, fifth time, I know, whatever. We're gonna say this is the one this time. So, without further ado, I'll just give you a heads up that I know I've received a number of messages asking if I'll also be still doing a traditional style podcast where I talk about works in progress, things I'm knitting, that kind of thing, finished objects, and that will still definitely be intermingled in between. So we'll probably do like a color work segment on a particular region, and then I'll do a more traditional style podcast and then another color work segment, that kind of thing. And then as well, I do have interview ideas lined up as well. So you can look forward to those. So today we are talking about Fair Isle color work. I will just give you a brief disclaimer that this is a very condensed and Cole's Notes kind of style thing. I didn't want to go on for hours and hours about all the things that there are to talk about, because I could go on for hours and hours. I definitely have read for hours and hours now, it feels like, all the different resources and whatnot that are available. So this is going to be a very condensed, just very brief kind of overview of color work, and then we're going to get into some of the actual hands-on of applied practices of Fair Isle color work. But I will leave links below to some of the resources or to all the references that I've used, and where you can either purchase them or read them yourself if you want to have a more in-depth overview of what I touch on today. So what we recognize today as Fair Isle knitting is, though it's been hinted at being present as early as the 16th century, it really wasn't discovered until the 18th century. What we know of from the 16th century is a really cute story, a little folklore story of a Spanish ship that wrecked on the Isle of Fair Isle. And the Spaniards who were on the ship, the story goes, taught the villagers while they were there, stranded there, how to knit all this elaborate color work, and that's how it was born. If you actually do some diving, the knitting of Spain from that period in the 16th century is not very colorful, does not have a lot of fancy patterning going on, so it's definitely more legend than actual fact, I guess you could say. If you do want to look it up though, the wreck was in 1588, and you can find almost every history book that you read or article that goes into the history of Fair Isle knitting will reference that shipwreck as being kind of a bit of legend to Fair Isle, so that's kind of cool. Where its name Fair Isle comes from, as you've probably figured out by now, is there's an island in the Shetland Islands called Fair Isle. And there was a number of islands where this kind of knitting tradition stems from, but it gets its name from that specific one. It came to popularity in the 1920s, specifically. It was a little bit of celebrity culture from back in the 1920s when the Prince of Wales was seen wearing sweaters knit in this traditional style, that people were like, I want that. I want to do that. Where do I get the pattern? How do I do that? I want to make that my thing. But where it was originally first discovered, or the hard evidence that they have and first actual piece of textile history that they were able to unearth is from the mid 19th century. Originally, I think there's a couple of different things, but the one that I have found reference that I can actually throw in a picture of here, and that you can actually see if you ever are at the Shetland Museum. There are two caps or hats, or we call them here in Canada toques. There are two caps that have the traditional kind of X and O patterning on them, and they're from around about 1860, and those were the first example of what we know now to be true Fair Isle, or what we consider true Fair Isle color work. And you'll see, if you look at knitting from that point on, you'll see how the color story expands and they start using more colors, they start trying different gauges, that kind of thing. These original caps would have been knit out of hand, or we know, I should say, are knit from hand spun yarn. They didn't have the equipment to manufacture something in a mill type setting, so it would have been hand spun, and commercial dyes weren't available either, of course, so they would have been naturally dyed from plants that you can find local to them. A tradition that actually still carries on to much of today. If you travel there, not everything is naturally dyed, but a lot, you can get a decent amount of things that have been naturally dyed there, and it's actually a trend that among yarn dyers and even some commercial yarn producers is making a bit of a comeback, is using natural dyes, which I think is kind of cool. They aren't as color fast in some cases as the commercial acid dyes, but they are a way of doing regenerative farming, which you can read more about. I'll put a link actually down to that below in case you haven't heard of what regenerative farming is. But it's a way of using what the land gives you and being able to just recycle everything and give back to the land while creating something really beautiful in this case. So that's where it kind of, that's our earliest evidence of Fair Isle. So I've already told you about where the name comes from, but where did the color patterning come from? This is a little bit of a harder question because we don't really know for sure. There's a few islands in that same kind of region. There's Orkney and Shetland, as well as Fair Isle, which would have been part of the trade routes between other parts of Scandinavia and the Baltics, like Latvia and Lithuania. So it's likely that there was a lot of influence from those different regions that play into what they then took and made their own. Some of the X and O type things, I know that there is a Norwegian colorwork thing, I'll throw it in here, that has like the X patterning on it. Not exactly the same, but it's a similar kind of idea. But so it's possible, it's quite possible that that's where some of the influences come from, is from some of the more Scandinavian and Baltic style color work that was present in Europe at the time. Now if we want to get into, that's kind of, like, to be honest, we don't have a lot more. I mean, you can go into the history of the island, you can go into the history of the people of the island, the textile industry, just in general. I'd be here for a very long time if we were going to go on that. So I'll throw in a couple references below. If you want to get a book that's going to be super informative for you, there has been a re-release of this wonderful book by Alice Starmore. And if you want to do research in general on Fair Isle history and stranded knitting, this is the author that you want to look for. She's got many, many books, but her books are kind of considered the benchmark of what you want to read. And that's where some of our examples are going to come from, and a lot of my reference comes from. But Alice Starmore is the one to go for. So you can get it on Amazon, you can get it in Canada, you can get it from Indigo, which we used to call Chapters. They have it, I think it's around $30, $35, something like that. Mine is a very old edition, so it's still hardcover, but they're paperback now, I believe. But this book is gold when it comes to both pattern reference material that you can use to make your own color work, as well as just the history of the area, of the knitting, all of that. it's a really, really excellent book. I'd highly recommend it. And now I need to wet my palette. I should note that I picked out my mug today because it's kind of Fair Isle-y. And then my sweater. I didn't say anything about my sweater. I figured it's our first colourwork episode. I had to wear a colourwork sweater. So this is not what you would consider a true Fair Isle sweater. The pattern is called Soldotna, and it's a top by Caitlin Hunter, also known as Boyland Knitworks. And it's a little cropped sweater. It doesn't go down very far. Sorry, so I like flash everybody. It's just a tank top, everyone. Sorry. But I really like this little tee. It's I actually made it to go with an empire waisted dress that I have that I really like wearing. My only criticism, just as a heads up, if you do want to go and knit this pattern, her necklines in general are very narrow. So I actually chopped off about this much because it came up and was like this. So I went to right where the color work starts, and I, after knitting the whole garment, cut off the whole neck, picked up from this first row of color work, and then just knit ribbing in with that stitch count. I didn't bother keeping that first part because it was too tight. It made me feel a little bit like, which is not a great look. So yeah. So now we've touched on a little bit of the history of Fair Isle, where we think some of the color work may have been inspired from. We want to get into a little bit more of what kind of makes a Fair Isle sweater a Fair Isle sweater. So I'll tell you first, if you were to pick up a Fair Isle sweater, there's a few things or boxes that it would need to tick in order for you to tell that yes, this is Fair Isle versus another form of stranded knitting. So in order for it to be an authentic piece of Fair Isle style color work, it must use a variety of colors. It can range from 2 colors, like you can have only 2 colors, but I've seen them go up as many as like 10, 11, 12. But typically somewhere is like 5 or 6 colors is probably more average-ish. But the rule is you can have as many colors in your overall garment as you want, but you may only use 2 in a row at a time. So in any one round of knitting, you can only use 2 colors. You also, that's another thing, rounds. You have to work it in the round. They never knit their sweater, so if you see a cardigan, that's a Fair Isle cardigan, it's been knit in the round, like how I would have knit this sweater, and then they've steeked it or cut it up the front. So I actually have a sweater here. This one, again, isn't a Fair Isle sweater, but this is one that I knit, and I knit it in the round. And then, so this whole panel would have been like continuous at one point, and then I cut it up the middle, and then added a button. I did an I-cord button band, so it's like an applied I-cord, but there's buttonholes for my buttons that I need to like I can't even line them up. It's hard to do sweaters up when it's kind of dark out and you're being blinded by a ring light. There, how it kind of goes. Anyway, so this is an example of a steeked sweater that I knit in the round and then cut up the middle. So that is another characteristic. They even, this one wouldn't even fit all of those rules because the sleeves in Fair Isle are also steeked in. So yes, you would knit like a tube essentially, and then you would steek. You'd knit in what's called a steeking panel on the sides where your sleeves would go in, and then also for the front where you would cut it. So this is not fully obeying those rules. And this is actually a Norwegian pattern that I knit, and then I'll tell you more about it when we do Norwegian color work, but it's one of those ones that I knit, and it was a pullover, and the directions were for a pullover, but I wanted it to be a cardigan, so I cut it. So that's another rule. Steeking, no back and forth. And then distance between switching your colors is very limited. So if you look at something, actually like my polar bear sweater here, you can see you have really long stretches where you might have like 10, 12, 14 stitches of white. And then you know, a few blue, but then a long stretch of white again. So with Fair Isle knitting, your floats can never go more than a few stitches. Typically 5 or 6 is kind of the limit. And if we look at this little cozy, which is what we're gonna actually steek as part of this episode, this cozy, you can see the colors. There might be only 2 colors in this like little section. Is probably the easiest place to tell it, but it never goes for more than 5, actually I think 6 stitches. 5? Actually, I think it's only 5. I have to look at my pattern again. I wrote this little pattern, which many of you have already downloaded. But basically, the floats are never very long. So you can see here's the wrong side, and you can see that those floats never go for very far, and I haven't had to catch them on the inside to keep them from kind of falling out. That's one thing I'll need to knit to show you guys is I have a really good habit of catching my floats with stranded knitting. Which is great because then things like lay a little bit nicer and you don't get, like if you're putting your arms in sleeves or your foot in socks or your hand in mittens, then your fingers don't get stuck on like these long floats and you don't pull stitches out. But in terms of actually showing you the difference of what it looks like on the opposite side of your color work, I don't have a good example of that right now. So you can stay tuned for that later. And I'll probably at the very end of this series maybe do like a brief recap that doesn't necessarily go into the history of the different color work, but just shows you all the different color work and what the right side versus the wrong side look like. So you can see just how different and varied they can look. So yeah, so there's that. And then the other last kind of thing is the patterning itself in terms of the shapes. And the sizes of them. So typically in Fair Isle knitting, the shapes or motifs are small, often they're geometric, and are things that can mirror themselves or they are mirrored. So if you think of like the traditional X and O pattern, which I think I have a picture of, what's this? I've sort of organized, from the Alice Starmore book. So this is the X and the O thing. So you can see the pattern itself is actually mirrored from one side to the other. And that is a really common and important part of what makes Fair Isle knitting Fair Isle, is that kind of geometric influence, the mirroring, and again, just those short repeats. You don't ever want to have things carried for a long period of time. So those are kind of the surefire way to be like, is this Fair Isle? Is it not? I thought I would go a little bit into some of the kind of interesting, without boring you hopefully, but there's a couple of terms that you might hear thrown around with Fair Isle, one being Peerie, which means, I think it's Scottish for small if I'm not mistaken. And that refers to the small designs in the Fair Isle knitting. So typically that's 1 to 7 rows. And then the next term is border, which we've all heard, but in the case of our Fair Isle knitting, it encompasses any design that's 9 to 15 rows. And then our motifs are anything kind of bigger than that. Anything that's 8 rows, I don't know what happened with that. That is, you'll have to take that up with your Fair Isle expert, which is not me. I am just the messenger. I don't know, though, again, that I think goes back probably to the mirroring aspect, is you usually need like an odd row in order to mirror something, unless you're stacking, let's say like you had an O, but the middle part of your O, instead of continuing to curve around, would have like a stack. I don't know how to describe it, but maybe I'll try to make a little graphic to throw in here, question mark. We'll try to do that. So you can kind of see what I mean about that. But I think that odd number likely correlates more with the fact that typically the images are mirrored and are geometric in nature. So when you hear the term Peerie, as I mentioned, it refers to a shorter design. Border is the slightly larger design, and then the motif is the bigger one. So a lot of the sweaters, I'm going to show you a picture of one right now that's made up of a combination of, actually no, I'm not going to show you that one. I'm going to show you this one, which is made up a combination of borders, Peeries, and a motif. So let's see here. I'm going to have to, my ring light's really bright, so I might end up having to like put a photo in there. I think that might be what we do. I'll put a photo in there, but you can see there's shorter passages that repeat. I'll try to put little arrows if I can. That's like, that says this is the period, this is the border, this is the motif, so you can kind of see. I have another image that I'm gonna put up. I've got a little sticky note with it as well. But these little designs right here are a perfect example of where you would get a period, a border, maybe another period, and then a motif. And there's no rules about, oh, you have to have X amount of period rows or period combinations followed by X amount of border followed by motif. You can have one period and then a motif. You could have two periods and then a motif. You could have a border, a period, and then a motif. It's very much mix and match, which is what I think makes Fair Isle knitting super fun, is because there is so much variety you can play with. You can be really, really strict and be like border, motif, you know, keep it really repetitive and rhythmic in a way, or you can really kind of stretch your creativity with it. And I'll see if I can throw in a few photos, either from this book or just as a general reference, that you guys can see, so you can actually see just how varied they can be. And this is, again, one of those books, if you can get your hands on it, even just from the library or something. She has entire, like, half of this book, more than half of the book. It's probably about half of the book. I'm just looking at it now. About half of the book is devoted to just groupings of, so she's got, like, on page 49, in case you want references, she's got like a section of 1 row periods, 2 row periods, 3 row periods, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, sorry, no 8. There's no 8. And then borders from 9 to 15 rows, which is kind of fun. And then she's got the bigger motifs, which are itemized as large Fair Isle patterns. So really, really cool stuff. A lot of fun. So I highly recommend this book. Yeah. So that kind of encompasses just a basic history of Fair Isle, a little bit about the colorwork structure and what you would do if you were wanting to create your own Fair Isle design and the rules you need to follow in order to make it a true Fair Isle design. So if you see a book that says Fair Isle, but you see that there's more than 2 colors in a single row, it's not actually Fair Isle, it's stranded knitting. And it's not uncommon today. A lot of people refer to almost all stranded knitting as Fair Isle, which is inaccurate. It should be stranded knitting. Largely we should be saying stranded knitting, and then Fair Isle is like a small subcategory of stranded knitting. And you'll see the difference, I think, a lot when we go to do the comparison of, say, Coast Salish colorwork, the more Scandinavian influenced one. I'm planning on doing like a Norwegian / Icelandic style one. I haven't decided if I'm gonna see how much information and how many of these, but there's gonna be at least 3 videos total where we do colorwork. This one, a Scandinavian one, and then a Coast Salish one. But if you look at, you can tell right away by looking at the right side and the wrong. If you look at the right side, the patterning styles are quite different to some degree. There are elements that are going to be the same. There's elements that are going to be quite different. But then when you look at the wrong side of the work, like I was showing you, so this is the right side, but then when you flip it inside out, you're going to tell instantly the difference between the 3, where you've got the long strands that get carried at the more Scandinavian style for long floats, and then in Coast Salish colorwork they have what's called intuitive colorwork, which creates this kind of pebbled effect on the back. And then you have the shorter floats of the Fair Isle. So I'm really looking forward to kind of diving into those a little bit with you and being able to kind of show you the differences, because I think it's really interesting to see, and you don't really realize it so much. But now I thought I would show you, we're gonna talk about steeking, because that's, as knitters, we want to know what the deal is with steeking. It's something that a lot of us are very intimidated by. A lot of us, sorry, my book and notes are falling down. Stay, okay. So yeah, we're gonna talk about steeking. So I'll tell you a little bit about it now, because it is now dark outside, and it's later in the day than I was planning when I was doing this. I might not actually steek this for another day, so that might have to be another section of the video, so I might change get up for the next part of this video, but just to give you a lowdown. So we've knit a cozy, a little cup cozy. It's all in the round. This is my own pattern. If you haven't already, feel free to go to my website. You can download it. It's linked on Ravelry. The Ravelry webpage is not letting me upload the PDF, or it's not making the PDF publicly available because originally it had a chart visible and someone flagged it. Apparently you're not allowed to do that even though it's a free pattern. I don't know why, but maybe in case of copyright, I don't know. Anyways, you can still find it. It's called Eek Steek Cozy. You can find it on Ravelry, and then I'll just link you to my website. You can just put that you live on like 123 Lane, because you do have to enter an address to download it for free, which is kind of annoying, but sorry. I did a workaround as best I could. And like 120 of you have downloaded it from all over, so that's kind of cool. So I've knit this. That is to say, I have knit this. And what we're gonna do, it's a little bit hard to see because it's quite narrow, but you can see where the color work gets kind of like, it's like very rhythmic, da da da, it's going really nicely, and then, oh, there's a little bit of a choppy part here. So you can see, if you look really closely, there's like 3 columns of stitches, and what we're gonna do is in the next part of this video, we're gonna reinforce the outer columns with a crochet chain, and then we're going to snip up the middle column, and then this will be able to open, and then we can put a button band on it to put on our thing. But that's how I did the sweater that I showed you earlier, and that's how you steek something. You don't always have to reinforce. I definitely say if it's your first time steeking something, reinforce it just for peace of mind more than anything. I don't recommend trying to steek things in superwash yarns because they don't like to stay as much as sticky yarns. Like this is some what is it, Lopi, it's the lace weight Lopi, so it's quite sticky. The stickier the wool, the better, because it's not going to move when you cut it, and it just looks nicer when you're doing color work, in my opinion, because it just kind of all, well, it all gels nicely, whereas color work never really settles in as much as non-superwash yarn does. You can do it with non-superwash, just don't do it as your first thing. Promise me you won't do it as your first thing. Also, start with something small, like a cozy, because then you're not spending hours and hours and hours knitting a sweater that you're gonna cut, and then if something does go wrong by accident or for whatever, you're not gonna be, oh, I've spent 40 hours or 50 or 60 hours knitting the sweater, and now I've either made it unsalvageable or it just isn't what I want. So, yeah. Now, full disclosure too, I haven't steeked anything in a while. So this is gonna be fun, and it could have errors, who knows? I've used very sticky yarn. My crocheting sucks, but that doesn't matter because you won't see it when I'm done, once we get our button band on. But we're gonna do it together. So I'm going to use this point in time to cut to when I film that footage. Okay, so we have our little cozy here, and as I was saying, you can kind of see we have these 2 columns. I'm hoping we're gonna have to mess around with this because it's gonna be a little bit tricky to see if I can get it in focus. And I'm gonna use a really high contrast yarn, so we're gonna use this a bit of green stuff, and then I have a crochet hook. So the goal is to be able to go, I'm just gonna make sure I can see in my camera. You're gonna go, I'll show you in here. This is, I've got a row of purl bumps that go all the way down. We'll see if my camera will focus. So I've got a row of purl bumps that go down here, and then right next to it is our row of our knit column, our stockinette column. So this is the column that we're gonna deal with, and you're gonna deal with it on both sides of, so we've got one here and one here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start at the very top, and I'm going to go through it, and we're essentially going to make a crochet chain all the way down. So let's see, I'm gonna try to do this from the side. I apologize if you hear rolling, because I'm gonna kind of try to do this from the side. Whoa. Okay, so we've got our yarn. So I'm gonna grab my first one from the front here, just to make sure I've pulled my green yarn through. And just to pull it up and through. Okay, so I've secured that first row. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and I'm going to essentially go into each. I think I would want almost a smaller crochet hook. I'm going to see if I have a smaller crochet hook. One moment. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so we're going to go into, so I've got this crochet loop on, and we're going to go in to the right side. I had to do this with very small yarn, didn't I? So you're going to go through, do your best. And as I said, it doesn't really matter if your crochet loop looks like garbage because you won't see it later. So there's my first loop. Nope, except for I didn't. There we go. All right, so now I'm gonna go down to the next arm. Let's see, is this, I don't even know if this is visible on the thing. So you can kind of see I've gone through that first loop, or V, the right arm of that V. So we're gonna do the same on the next arm. So I've gone through, catch it, pull it through the other loop. And voila. Gonna go to the next one. See if we can get it to focus. There we go. Next one. Wrap it. Pull it through. And it's always making sure that you're pulling it. So like, see there, I just dropped that one. So this one, I'm gonna pull out. And it takes a bit of practice. I'm not a crocheter by any means. So it takes time and practice. Eep. And as I said, also, I haven't done this in a long time. So, you know, on top of not being a crocheter, it's like, here, let's do it on camera and try to, and I picked tiny, tiny yarn. Oh my goodness, this is not working. Tiny yarn. This is where you get the panicking Kelsey music. Okay, there we go. Through. Haha, victory, yes. Okay, so I'm gonna go and do this. I will probably either speed this up or just talk less or whatever, but I'm gonna go all the way down this side. I'm gonna do the same thing all the way down the other side. I'm gonna try to not make it look so messy. As I said, maybe go with, you can go with thicker. I went with like a lace weight super sticky yarn, and I knit very tight, so that kind of makes this a little more challenging as well. Can I just point out how awesomely my nails match what we're doing right now? I think even a smaller crochet hook than what I have right now would actually work better. I don't even know if I own a smaller crochet hook. There we go. Yeah, that one worked. That one worked. Alright, so I'm back. You can see I have reinforced this whole side of my steeking panel up here. You can see I got better as I got further along because of practice. you can see I haven't quite gone over top of the end yet. So what you want to do is you can go, this is my cast on or cast off edge. So instead of just going through one arm, I'm going to go through 2 arms like this and pull this guy through and then go over top once and pull this guy through, just to make sure that there's no issues. And then I ripped way more yarn than I needed. So this is thin yarn. Let me see if I can break it on camera without ruining my steek. There we go. And I'll just pull that loop out and voila. So that's what it looks like on the right side. And then you can't even see it on the inside, which is kind of cool. It is buried in there somewhere, but this is how it should look. So I'm gonna go and you do the same thing on both sides. So I'm gonna do the other side of the steeking panel, and then we'll come back and we will cut it. Snip, snip, snip. All right, here it is. You can see this one's a little bit loose. So you can see my crochet reinforcement is not like the prettiest thing on the planet, but don't worry, we won't be able to see this by the time we're all done. What's gonna happen is after we cut it with these very cool scissors, shout out to Crafty Jack's Boutique, probably I have the hiccups, where I got these in Knit City a couple years ago. I'm sure you can get them from other places, but they're fun, and I figure if we're gonna cut our knitting, we might as well use cool scissors. What you'll see though, what I was starting to say is the side here where those purl bumps are, if my camera will focus, that's gonna fold under, and we're gonna end up picking up stitches along here to put our button band on. But for today, shall we cut it? So the biggest thing is just to be careful. Doesn't matter which direction you cut it from, but you can also make a wider steeking band if you're nervous about cutting up a single column. I just figured I'm gonna go for it and see what happens. So here we can play our dramatic music and just be very careful as we cut up our column of stitches. And just like that. Ta-da! There it is. Still wants to flap back on itself because I knit it kind of tight, but there it is. Look at that. We have cut our thing in half. It is flat now. How cool is that? And you can see how nicely these looks on the side now. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna now go and pick up stitches just on the inside of this reinforcement band here, and you can see I can pull on it. It's not going anywhere. The stitches aren't coming out, so I'm not being especially gentle with it. Draw. So you can see it's not unraveling. It's all staying put. If I can get my camera to focus, let me see if I can. There. So you can see it's all staying put. I've like rifled on it a bunch. It's not going anywhere. So yeah. So next step is we're going to pick up those stitches along the side as I mentioned, and we'll put a button band on. The directions, it's just like if you're picking up for a shoulder on a sweater, sorry, not a shoulder, a neckline on a sweater. It's the same kind of principle where you go in a row and just pick up all your stitches along the side. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to add a button band on, and I will show you the completed thing a little later because I still have some knitting to do now. Ba-dum. Hi guys, so it's a couple days later since I filmed the steeking and the rest of the podcast, and I just wanted to show you what the finished cup cozy looked like. So I've steeked it, and I have now put it on a Starbucks cup that I had left over from the other day, but here it is on here. So it's got, I put on a button band, and I'll take it off so you can see. So, full disclosure, my buttons are not on as even as they could have been because I wasn't paying attention when I was putting buttonholes in. But there's what the button bands look like. And you can see, so the steeking part where we crocheted has folded over really nicely. And I have just, it was sticking up a little bit, which it might. And so what I did is I just kind of whip stitched it down. You can kind of see the red yarn. So I just left my cast on when I was picking up all my stitches nice and long on one side, and then my tail when I cast off rather, nice and long, so when I wove in my end I just wove it in and then whip stitched all the way down here. And I did that on both sides. So you can see, and this is my very fancy button job. But so that's what it looks like. That's your finished cup cozy. So then you can have awesomely dressed cups. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode on Fair Isle, and I hope you try steeking something. If you do, I would love to see photos. Comment in the comments what you want to make, what you're gonna steek. I would love to see, and yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to our next color work episode and to diving into more with you. So if you have any if you have any questions, comments, anything, stuff you want to see, that kind of thing, please throw it down below and we will do our best to cover it in one of our podcasts. Thanks for hanging out. Bye.